Our YouTube, so we're back, of course, talk about some Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I'm going to be honest, with this video, maybe future videos for a while, I'll probably still slip in and out of saying Remake Part 2, Remake Part 1 to talk about the first game. It might be a while before I really get, like, consistently calling them Remake and Rebirth to differentiate the two, but for now, I mean, Part 2, Part 1, you know what I'm talking about, if that happens. For today's video, I want to further talk about the game a bit, but also go over some stuff that I didn't really cover with the previous video. For example, the first thing we're going to talk about here is the dev messages that we got on Twitter, like the day that Rebirth was revealed. We read over those, but I showed them, and we really only talked about Nomura's, but I only read the first message from Nomura. I didn't read the second message for some goddamn reason. I don't know what the hell I was doing. So we're going to go ahead and read it. It says, I can't wait to share the intention behind naming the first title Remake, which I think we kind of know what that is, and the second title Rebirth. In time, I hope to reveal what the third title will be called, and where this journey will ultimately lead. The development of Rebirth has been progressing rapidly since we adopted a new development structure. A title of this scale in which everything is interconnected even before production began is truly rare. In fact, some development has already begun on the third title. I myself have started on the development and am working towards the completion of the series. We will work to deliver this title to fans with the same amount of enthusiasm from now until we reach the finish line. In the meantime, please enjoy the other 25th anniversary projects, blah, blah. So pretty much every aspect of what we just read is great news. The fact that they've already started working on Part 3 to some degree. The fact that Nomura would like to tell us the title of Part 3 in some time, which would ultimately tell us where the journey is going to lead. I don't know if that means we'd ever learn what the third game will be called before Part 2 even comes out, because that'd kind of maybe be a spoiler, so it might be a while, right, till we actually know the title of Part 3. But the fact that they have like a new development structure that allows them to kind of make the games a lot faster, it seems like. That's why we're already seeing Part 2, and that's why Part 2 is coming out next year. Let me correct myself there. Not next year, next winter, which could be anywhere from December to March of 2024, but you get what I'm saying. I did, however, want to read part of Katase's message because we didn't read this the other day, and the first part to me is pretty funny because he says, we've officially announced that the second title, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, will be released next winter, approximately 3 years after the original Final Fantasy VII released in April 2020. Now, I don't know if math is hard for our boy Katase, but that is definitely not approximately 3 years. I mean, at that point, we're pushing 4 years old. I don't know why he's trying to like make it sound like shorter than it actually is, because the earliest the Rebirth could come out is next year in December. We're talking late December if we're talking about the actual winter season. And even December of next year would be 3 years and 8 months. We're past the halfway point, Katase. We're rounding up, my guy. We're almost to 4 years. And if it comes out anytime within 2024, we're just getting closer and closer to that 4-year mark. And I'm not complaining about the time frame, because these are what we've been speculating for a long, long time. We've been saying 3 to 4 years. Some people think 5 years, but we're in that ballpark, right? 2023 is 3 years. 2024 is 4 years. This is fine with me. I just don't know why he didn't just say approximately 3.5 years. That would have made more sense. It just stood out to me. Thought it was kind of funny. The other part I wanted to read is the third paragraph that says, making the middle part of a trilogy has its own challenges, but there are plenty of classic second installments in the world of film that are defined by stunning story twists and deeper explorations of their characters. Often, these second installments become a favorite amongst the fans. And this is something I've seen Max talking about recently, but also as far back as 2020, even before we knew that this was confirmed to be a trilogy, that usually the second part of a trilogy is tragedy. It's tragic. It's when our characters are at their lowest, people die, etc., etc. It's like a storytelling trope, so to speak, when it comes to film. Probably going to be the case here, especially the fact that Katase specifically mentions the second part of a trilogy of films. In Max's case, he used Empire Strikes Back. I'm not a Star Wars person, so I don't get the reference. I'm assuming tragedy happens in the film, obviously. When it comes to FF7, there's multiple places that this could be. The main one that a lot of people focus on is the end of Disc 1, City of the Ancients. Of course, if you know, spoiler warning, I suppose, Aerith's death. Like, that obviously makes sense. That's the moment where our characters would be at their lowest. But as Max points out as well, the North Crater, which is also probably equally thought of as a place that Part 2 could end, is another moment where our group is very, very low, so to speak, where a lot of our group gets separated. We don't even know if Cloud is alive. Meteors come into Gaia to destroy the fucking planet. We have a bunch of giant monsters stomping around the planet destroying stuff. Like, it just really makes sense when you think about it. It's hard to really judge whether or not, you know, North Crater versus Aerith's death, which one's more tragic, which one's a better ending. But North Crater makes a lot of sense too when you really think about it, especially given the trope of a trilogy, usually the second part's about tragedy. My thing is, now that we know it's a confirmed trilogy, confirmed 2 more games, we could almost do the math on how they could split up the story a bit between the 2 games. Obviously, we don't know exactly where that'd be, plus you gotta factor in the new additional stuff they want to add in terms of, like, fleshing out locations, adding story to locations, side quests, exploration, whatever the case. And the thing is, we still have every bit of the FF7 story left outside of Midgar to go through within 2 more games, right? And we're talking about the rest of the world of Gaia. We've only ever been in Midgar. We have not been anywhere else in the world. The thing is, going forward, we have to finish the rest of the Final Fantasy VII story, which they're going to follow probably like 90-95%, but they're going to add some new shit, of course, just like they did with Part 1. And it's making me think that we're not going to have like super in-depth questing for most of the locations, because there's still so much to do, man. So we're just doing this based off of OG FF7 and just by locations, not by story beats. But we obviously have to still do Calm, which is where Part 2 is going to start. But then Calm, Chocobo Farm, Mithril Mine, Junon, Cargo Ship, Costa del Sol, Mount Krill, Gold Saucer, Krill Prison, Gungaga, Cosmo Canyon, Nibelheim, Rocket Town, Gold Saucer, Temple of the Ancients, Bone Village, Forgotten Capital. That's the end of Disc 1. Then we get to Disc 2, Forgotten Capital, Icicle Inn, The Great Glacier, Gaia's Cliff, Whirlwind Maze, Junon, Medeal, Mount Krill, Fort Condor, Medeal, Underwater Reactor, the Underwater Submarine Battle, if that's a thing, Rocket Town, Cosmo Canyon, Forgotten City, and Diamond Weapon, then Midgar, and then we get to Disc 3, which is just the Northern Cave. That's a shit ton of stuff to get through, and that's not even accounting for all the optional shit that probably wouldn't be optional, stuff like Wutai. Like, if you pay attention, I didn't even mention Wutai through all that, because that's an entirely optional thing to do. More than likely, we're going to have to go to Wutai for the story, right? So that adds on more stuff that we got to do, on top of, again, the brand new shit that they want to add. The thing is, I absolutely do agree that Whirlwind Maze, North Crater, whatever you want to say, is a good stopping point for Part 2, thematically for sure. But the thing is, post that, and at least based on the original FF7, there's not a whole lot to do in comparison to what happened before, because after that's really only Junon, Medeal, Mount Krill, Fort Condor, Medeal, Underwater Reactor, Rocket Town / Cosmo Canyon, Forgotten City, Diamond Weapon, Midgar, and then it's back to North Crater for the end of the game. In comparison, that's only like a handful of locations and a handful of story compared to everything else prior to it, because you're looking at wanting to accomplish the rest of Disc 1 and like half of Disc 2 with the next game for Remake. And if they're going to do that, we're going to be kind of just rushing through locations, it seems like. The thing is, it really kind of comes down to how many chapters they're going to be able to put into each game, because something like Calm is probably going to be at least 2 chapters, I would think, just because the Calm Flashback is probably going to be at least 1 chapter, because when you go back to original FF7, the Calm Flashback's like, it's long, dude. It's like 20 or 30 minutes or some shit. It's like a bit of a slog, to be honest, to get through. And if that's that long in the original FF7, how long is that going to be in Remake? Just using Remake as an example, again, they turned the first bombing mission that is like, 5-10 minutes or some shit in the original FF7 into like an hour-long segment. On top of that, there's a decent chance they're going to give story to Calm, because Calm doesn't have that, right? We go there for the Calm Flashback, and that's it. We leave the town. Now they're probably going to give us named characters there and some sort of story to accomplish, whatever that might be. I know we're going on a bit of a tangent. We're kind of going in circles here, but I'm trying to get like a baseline idea, just based on locations alone, how they could potentially handle Part 2 and Part 3. And from Calm to the Forgotten Capital, the end of Disc 1, is like roughly like 17 locations. And when it comes to Disc 2, there's like 15 locations, but that's also including Forgotten Capital, because that's where we pick the game up. And then you also, again, Disc 3 is just the final dungeon. So in terms of just like the numbers of locations, dude, honestly, like Forgotten Capital makes the most sense if you just assume that each and everything is going to be its own like roughly chapter or so. Again, this is purely speculation. It's not based on anything really except numbers. But again, post North Crater, post Whirlwind Maze, dude, there's just not nearly as much story to do as there would be prior to that. They'd have to stretch out locations or add in a bunch of new shit. Hopping back to the Rebirth trailer, and a topic that's being brought up again is, will we be able to control Sephiroth during the Calm Flashback? Fan service-wise, you'd think they would, right? That makes the most sense. That's something people have kind of been wanting for a long time. People wanted that with the original FF7. We didn't get to control him. He decimates everything in existence as we're going through Nibelheim and Mount Nibel and shit. My thing is, and I did a whole video talking about this, I'm not entirely sure how they're going to handle it. Just because when it comes to Remake, we've already had multiple instances where we had teammates that we could not fully control. We obviously had Red 13 with like the very later parts of base game Remake. Obviously, it makes sense why he was AI, because there wasn't enough time to give him his own equipment and weapon cores and all that other shit. But then you have the Yuffie DLC where we had Sonon, who was literally everything a regular teammate is, outside of being able to actually switch him in combat. He literally had his own weapons, armor, materia, weapon cores, all that shit. You can issue him commands in the middle of combat. You just couldn't switch to him. The other thing is, the point of the Calm Flashback, to a certain degree, besides the actual exposition that you're getting, is to show you how powerful Sephiroth is with the original FF7. We don't need that now. We've already fought against Sephiroth. He threw goddamn buildings at us at the end of Remake, right? So we don't need to see how strong he is in that way. So I don't know if it matters that we're walking around with Sephiroth watching him destroy everything in one hit. It just doesn't really matter. It can be fun. I want to do that. I hope I can do that. It's not necessarily necessary from like a narrative standpoint. You can sort of look at it from both ways, where it makes sense, like, to actually give the player the ability to control him and actually get to decimate everything, so you get to feel how powerful he is, but also would make sense somewhat thematically as well, that you can't control him, and he gets to warp around the battlefield just decimating everything as you are level 1 Cloud who can't do a goddamn thing. One last thing I want to touch on really quickly before we wrap up the video is with the trailer breakdown I did the other day, I pointed out how at the end of the trailer, whenever Zack and Cloud are walking towards Midgar, you can clearly see that the Sector 7 plate is still intact. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that the episode intermission ending isn't post-Platefall, because it still could be. We don't know how long Zack and Cloud are going to be in Midgar until Zack decides to go to the Sector 5 church to find Aerith, because they're on the run from Shinra, right? There's a good chance that they could go in hiding for quite some time. Maybe they're in hiding long enough for the destruction of Sector 7 to happen, and maybe Zack sees that as an opportunity to go look for Aerith, since Shinra's probably going to be distracted with all that. It's all hypothetical. I want to point that out, just because I made it seem so definitive that like all this is happening before Playfall, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. But my dudes, I think that's where we're going to wrap up the video. It feels good to be officially talking about Part 2 now, instead of just like theory video, so to speak. That's kind of what this is, obviously, but at least we now know the game exists. We have a title, we've seen some footage. It's nice, dude. It feels so damn good. And I do see some people like talking about when we can next see it, when that might be. I do think we're going to see Part 2 again this year. I just don't know when and where. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know if we're going to get another teaser trailer, an actual trailer, but I do think they're going to at least talk about the game again sometime within the year. But of course, I want to pass off to you guys. I know we're still a long way away from Part 2 coming out, and there's still so much of the game that we've not even seen yet. But where do you think Part 2 is going to end in terms of the FF7 story? It's a topic we talked about before, but now that we actually see the game, we know it's a trilogy. What are your thoughts? My dudes, that's the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, give a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys aren't interested in more Final Fantasy VII Rebirth content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter, @DaveYT, and my Discord. Links to social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.